is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Dark Lord of Derkholm by Diana Wynne Jones, brought to you by Patricia. Chapters 15, 16, and 17. In these chapters, shit starts to go left in a bigger way. More people are being affected by things. And also, Shona gets some really bad news that she does not take well at all. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. And these chapters, it's been a little bit since I read for Dark Lord. I always want to say Dark Duke. I don't know why I have that in my head, but I don't think it's ever going away. But yeah, I think it's been like 2 weeks or so. And this story, I just had kind of like lost track of how anxiety inducing it is, because so much of it has to do with plans going wrong and everyone trying desperately to hold it together and nobody knowing that they're going wrong on purpose. And also, you know, what all comes with that, which is like this feeling of incompetence. Like, am I the one that's fucking it up? Is it my fault it's all going wrong? Frustrations and just a feeling of general, like, the world is not fair, which it is not fair. But this certainly doesn't help. And this is something that's being done to, like, help everyone in the long run if Querida's plan works out. But it really remains to be seen if what she's thinking is even going to have any effect at all. Because Chesney just doesn't seem like... Chesney is just such a money man that I feel as if the Pilgrim... So here's my thing. Querida in the last section said that what she was hoping was to cause so many problems with the setup for the Pilgrim tour that it would essentially wind up being far more money than it was worth, and that Chesney would wind up calling it off, that he would decide, like, it's just not worthwhile. I'm going to pull the plug on this idea entirely. In my opinion, it would have to go so badly wrong that something irrevocable would have to happen, because you don't quit an entire enormous undertaking like this because of one bad year, right? Chesney's been doing this for a while. Everybody talks about it as if this has been going on for, like, you know, decades now. I just don't see one badly organized year that doesn't do too well hampering his ambitions or greed at all. And even if he did agree to get rid of the pilgrim tours in the first place, that doesn't mean he's leaving this weird parallel country alone. All it means is that he isn't going to use that as a means of making money. But that doesn't mean that he won't exploit everyone in a totally different way, a new and exciting exploitation. So while I admire that Querida is trying to do something, because I really understand the impulse and the feeling of, like, there's no way that this is going to, that I can sit back and just let this continue to happen without even trying to stop it. I don't think her method here is sound, and I don't think it's going to work. And I'm a little bit saddened that she's trying something like this. You know, I had said before that I understood to a degree. Oh, excuse me, my router fell over. I understood to a degree why she didn't want to tell anybody else in this world, except for a couple of trusted, like, advisors, that she was purposely sabotaging stuff, because it has to look like people are really trying to keep it together. And if they know it's purposely being sabotaged, then they aren't going to put the same effort into desperately keeping everything on course. So I do get her thought process behind that, I think. I might be wrong about her reasoning, but I think that's it. Now, if that's true, I think she could have let at least a couple more people in on the secret. But, you know, I'm really feeling like what she's planning isn't going to work anyway. And so I'm probably not being as, like, circumspect in what my plan would be and how I would carry it out as she is, because she believes in her plan more than I do. So it's just really hard to watch how hard this is on everyone else who is just trying to do their damn job, knowing that it's all in an effort for something good, but that effort doesn't seem like it's based in anything that's, like, actually going to pan out. So, all right, starting chapter 15, we have Derk finally arriving at the camp with Scales. He's riding on Scales' back. And the fact that Derk arrives in this fashion makes a big impression on all of the bad troop dudes. They are so afraid of Scales because obviously the dude they think ate one of them. So you would be. They are so afraid of him that the fact that Derk is able to, like, ride on his back in that fashion really makes him seem to them as if he must be even worse than Scales. And we know that Scales didn't eat anybody, so to us, Scales hardly seems like, but for them, that was very real. And so they assume that this dude who rules over the animal that ate one of their guys has to be just, like, way more fierce and bloodthirsty and whatever. So there's, you know, a certain amount of respect that comes from that, but it's mostly fear and hatred. And poor Blade is not ready. Like, he keeps seeing the way that some of these soldiers look at his dad, and he was just unprepared for the level of hatred that he was going to see in their eyes. And I really feel that. That's actually, I was just covering earlier the episode of The Novice where she makes eye contact with Regin during one of her classes and is, like, blown away and at how much he clearly hates her, and, like, sits there after pulling her eyes away thinking to herself, what could I have done to cause that level of hatred in someone? And it's a really difficult thing to express in words, but I really, you know, when that happens, when you make eye contact with somebody who really doesn't like you and it's like a physical blow, it really feels like a tangible thing that has just happened to you. And it's extremely hard if somebody has not had that kind of experience, like with someone, not even a confrontation. It just has to be eye contact. It's hard to express how disturbing that can be, even if it's coming from somebody whose opinion you don't care about that much or that you don't respect and worry about that much. It's just the knowledge that somebody out there dislikes you that much that's a little jarring. So yeah, this entrance, like, serves Derk in some ways, but I feel like in the long run might not do a lot of great good. So, and the one good piece of news that we get here is that I don't think Scales is going to eat the dwarves. We were worried that he had already done it. And we find out here that he actually went to talk to the dwarves, with Derk, that he, like, sensed something was wrong. And that was why he was so urgent to get away, which is very much not what any of us were thinking. And the fact that he sensed something was wrong makes me kind of think that this dragon, like, is a little bit more on the ball than anyone. Like, he seems to just be able to keep track of the way things should be and what should be happening better than everyone. But yeah, whichever of you asked those dwarfs what they were doing did a really smart thing. That was me, said Don, but Blade asked too. Anyone would. It was pretty queer. You're right, said Derk. It was pretty queer. Scales came and told me about it, and then we flew out to ask them some questions. Then we had to go back and send Elda and Colette to Mara. It's been a busy night. And Blade's like, oh, sweet. I guess Scales didn't eat those dwarves after. But then he says, well, what happened to the dwarves in the end? And Derk says, we gave them a change of destination, Scales' idea, and sent them to Derkholm. We told them quite truthfully that it's the Dark Lord's citadel. They were quite pleased because it wasn't nearly so far to go. This more or less set Blade's mind at rest, although he felt slightly dubious when Derk turned to Scales and said, "I suppose you'll want to be off looking for the rest of the dwarves with tribute now." "I shall help you get these murderers into their barracks first," Scales replied. "I can't see how you would get them there without a dragon to drive them." So, Blade is comforted, but once he's being told that Scales is gonna hunt down dwarves, he still gets a little bit worried about it, which that feels fair. I'm wondering if dwarves taste, because Scales in the last section very specifically said that he doesn't really like to eat people, that they don't taste good to him. So I'm wondering if dwarves taste different. But really, the question wasn't whether or not he was super eager to munch on a bunch of dwarves. It was that he wanted their gold. And I can't help but wonder if this rerouting is just a method for him to start fucking building some gold pile at the Dark Lord Citadel for him to sit on. So they start getting everybody moving. And in order to set things up, Blade is sent ahead with 3 hamperfuls of stuff using the translocation spell. And Blade, when he is sent on, anticipates that he is going to get a day off. And one would think that he's excited about that, but it is not the case, actually. He's having a lot of conflicting feelings about this. And I really like the way that she describes his mental process here, because this feels very, very true. I think a lot of us have conflicting feelings about plenty of things that happen to us in our lives. There's very little that you can quite easily point to and say, that was a really good thing that happened, and that was a bad thing that happened. There are some, but a lot of things have weird ripple effects that when you look back, it was a bad thing at the time, and now you're sort of like, well, actually. And in the moment, you can have so many different emotions regarding how something is shaking out, because you just don't have the perspective yet of time and distance. So you don't know how to feel. And I like this section. Dad seemed to be in charge again. In a way, it was a great relief. Blade did not need to feel rushed and worried anymore. There was no need any longer to keep thinking of all the things that might go wrong. Derk could do that now, but Blade did not feel as carefree as he expected. The loose, easy feeling he had as he stood there throwing stones struck him as rather babyish. And Dad had made him feel even more babyish by ordering him off here with those hampers. Blade hated being pushed around. He found he wanted to think of things for himself, then do them. He wondered if Kit felt the same. Kit had been really subdued when they saw Derk coming. So yeah, I found that really interesting, that feeling of you get given so much more than you think you can really handle, but somehow you cope with it. And then someone comes in and swoops in and takes over, and there's a little bit of resentment, and almost as if you feel them coming in and taking it away and sort of in their mind helping you is them indicating that they don't have faith in you somehow, and I just thought that was an interesting detail to put in there about his character and the way that he's coping with this, because he's growing up a little. And I really love that despite all of this, and despite what we know what happens, in just a few minutes at this new site, all of these people start to show up and they all have problems and grievances. We find out that Blade starts as one of the wizards leading a pilgrim tour in a day, and he was not ready. He was not keeping track of the time and was supposed to have been studying and attending to all of this in preparation, and didn't do that. So it's the kind of thing where it's and this is so very true of coming of age, I feel, where you have this moment of feeling oh, I really got this one thing done that was an emergency that I wasn't ready for, and I feel really good about myself, and I feel proud that I managed it. And then you realize that in the hustle and bustle of managing this unexpected thing, you forgot about another thing that you should have been ready for. And it's because you are at an age where you're starting to take on responsibilities, but you haven't learned to juggle yet. And you haven't learned to multitask, and you haven't learned your own faults. And I feel like that's the real thing, is that when you get to around 30 years old, I feel like you start to get much more of a handle on who you are as a person. And because you start to get more of a handle on it, you are able to protect yourself against yourself. Does that make sense? So like, I, for example, know very well that I lose track of time like crazy. I will sit down to start something and think that I've been working on it an hour, and I look up and it's been 4. I will put something in the oven and I will think like, oh, I'll remember to come and take it out. And I completely lose track of time. And then it gets burnt to a crisp. I am really bad with like the concept of time, frankly. And that is the sort of thing that 10 years ago, I did not understand about myself. And I still thought, oh, I'll remember to do this. Oh, I'll be able to do this in this amount of time. And I suffered so much because I didn't see my own shortcomings clearly enough to compensate for them by preparing for the inevitable fuck-ups that I was going to have. And Blade is there, right? He's like managed this crisis with his dad getting burnt up and being forced to do this whole thing. He's managed it quite well, considering how young he is. But the one thing that he's actually assigned to do, he got so distracted because of all of these things that are coming up that he completely dropped the ball. And I mean, I'm saying like, I'm making it sound as if like, well, now I don't do that anymore. That's not true at all. Like of course I still do this kind of shit, but I have learned how to safeguard against it a lot more effectively. So it happens less often. And when it does happen, it's on less important stuff a lot of the time. So yeah, I just really think that Blade is starting to see what it's like to be an adult. And he's enjoying it in some ways and not in others. And I feel like the battle is kind of a metaphor for that, which we'll get to. So here Blade is exploring the campsite. And he's looking around and just the whole thing feels wrong to him. And we find out that this camp is in quite the wrong place. I thought that Barnabas was putting it in the wrong place on purpose as part of the efforts to sabotage everything. But Derk says later that he asked Barnabas to put it here. So that was surprising. I really assumed, this whole time that this was what was going on with Barnabas. And Barnabas, meanwhile, is supposed to be setting all of this up. And his ass is drunk. So very drunk. And the kind of drunk where you will fall asleep on any flat surface. Like, I think everybody's been there at one time or another, right? Where you just overdid it. You did it too quickly. And you're like in someone's house or whatever, and things are chill enough. They're like, you know what? And you just like lay down on the floor. You're like, I just need to lay down. Oh my God, I got to do it. And Barnabas has done that in what is supposed to be an outhouse. And there is no like latrine dug or anything. And he is curled up on the floor asleep. And there is like an empty barrel there. So he drank a whole lot. And Blade is super irritated because there is so much left to do. And it's 6 hours before everybody gets here. And he's just kind of like, I hope that you can pull this off. I'll be able to help you with some things here and there. But damn, like you really need to step up. And when Barnabas first gets woken up and Blade is yelling at him, he turns right over and goes back to sleep again. And Blade has to do this spell on him that makes him feel cold. And I found this a little strange. Not the spell itself, but the fact that this is the first time I think that we've heard about him being able to do this, if I'm not mistaken, unless there was something really early. And so it's the first time I feel like, oh, okay. sorry guys, Patricia's in the chat here. She says, no, he did it in the first chapter. Okay. That was like, I was like, I feel like there was something really early, but I didn't remember about this. Okay. So that's what it was. And then when all of the, other people come and join them at this like incorrectly placed campsite, he keeps getting comments from all of these people about how like, now don't do your cold spell on me. And I was like, how does everybody know about this? But okay. And he winds up using this cold spell to like basically chill Barnabas awake, which I don't know how y'all react to being cold, but it does tend to keep you alert. As much as I hate being cold, it can be good that way. That's something that I really have to watch out for when I'm like driving alone for long stretches of time in the winter, is the heat blowing on me. And the sort of like, there's a real soporific effect to the sound of your tires on cement for a long time when you're not having to change. Like, that's something that in Texas especially, I have only just started to get used to. In Connecticut, there was a lot of winding roads. There was a lot of, jumping on and off exits really quickly. There was a lot, everything is closer together and more crowded. Texas, I can drive in a straight fucking line for 40 minutes and not even hit a fucking stoplight, like not see any businesses the whole time. Everything up here, especially in North Texas, is really spread out and really boring to look at a lot of the time. It can be pretty, lots of farmland, but it's not, it doesn't require the sort of alertness that driving in more urban settings does. So combine that with being really warm and cozy in your car, and it can be really hard for me to not like start to have my eyes droop. And my way of dealing with that is always turn the fucking AC on and blast it in your face. That's the only thing that works. Like, so this was actually a smart move, I think. And he pulls back on it once it seems like Barnabas is like taking him seriously and actually going to start doing what he needs to do. But he leaves it at like half strength for quite a while until Barnabas is starting to think that he's still cold because of withdrawal symptoms. Which is sort of adorable that he thinks that he has withdrawal symptoms when he was just drunk 5 minutes ago. Like, you're still drunk, guy. You're not having withdrawal. You're drunk still. But okay. And eventually he winds up pulling back on it completely because he, I think, had forgotten that he'd laid it and left it for so long. But he also needed it to stay in place to keep motivating Barnabas so that he didn't just lay down and fall asleep. So Barnabas finally like starts to get to work on all of this stuff. But Blade also, there's another person here. And here we go. Blade crunched over to the big hut where the horse gave him a glum look and put his head in through the open door. It was raw, new mess in there. The place was clearly meant to be the cookhouse and eating hall, but the huge stove had its iron chimney leaning against it, not yet connected to the hole in the ceiling, and the tables and chairs were stacked like timber at one end of the room. In between, there were numbers of big packing cases, which Blade supposed must be full of cups, plates, or even food. The owner of the horse was sitting on one of those big wooden boxes eating breakfast, or possibly lunch, from a silk handkerchief spread on the knees of his green velvet trousers. He was a tall, dark man, beautifully groomed, and a total stranger to Blade. "Who are you?" Blade blurted. The man looked up. "I return you the same question," he said, in a calm, unfriendly way. "I'm Derk's son, Blade," Blade told him. "Conrad the Bard," replied the man. "Does your presence mean that the Dark Lord has arrived?" "They'll be here this evening, and you don't want to be inside here when the soldiers come in. They'll kill you." "I am aware of that. My business is not with them." "What are you doing here yourself?" "I'm looking for Wizard Barnabas," Blade explained. Conrad shrugged. "I know no such person. There's a drunk in a hut at the back who might know. He seems to have been here for some time." "I'll ask him then," said Blade. The This camp is in the wrong place. Did you know? It's miles too far south. I had trouble finding it. Nothing to do with me, Blade answered, but that did explain why he had been so puzzled, he supposed. He crunched around the back of the cooking hall. So he goes around the back, and, like, not only is Barnabas passed out, and this guy, Conrad, I didn't know what to make of him, so I just kind of put him out of my head, to be honest. But this horse has been tied here for, like, a full day and a half, and is so hungry and thirsty. And I appreciate it a lot that Blade, like, can sense that and immediately goes and takes care of it. But yeah, I felt so, like, animal care. I just get very, there's just something so shameful to me about not caring for an animal that depends on you. It's just really inexcusable to me. So Barnabas is on my shit list purely because of that, very much aside from the whole thing with supposing to set up the camp and then not doing it. I don't normally binge like this when I'm working. The pressure just all got too much this time. Dad won't be here till this evening. You've got about 6 hours to get the camp finished in. You better get up and get going. I hadn't I? Barnabas agreed readily. If you'd stop freezing me to death, young Blade, I'll get up and attend to everything. I promise. Blade did not believe him. It seemed hard not to trust a friend of Dad's who had been like an uncle to you all your life, but Blade remembered that Barnabas had given them no help at all with the soldiers, even when he knew Derk was not with them, and he said sternly, I'll stop when you're standing up. So yeah, I appreciated that too, that Blade's like, you know what? I can't fuck with this. I am going to make sure that you do what you're supposed to do. Some people just need that, man. Some people just need to be pushed. Happens. You don't understand, Blade. If you only knew how hard Mr. Chesney makes us work, you'd have some sympathy for it. I do know, said Blade. By now. He took some of the coldness off, but not all of it. A sort of half-chill might help Barnabas to get sober, he hoped. So he gives him a bunch of instructions. As he went, he realized he was feeling rushed and worried again. He was so used to the feeling and so used by now to thinking of more things that could go wrong that he hardly checked in his stride when he came crunching out of the dome and saw a group of cloaked and plumed young warriors waiting beside the 3 hampers. Wow, he thought, they look smart, and crunched on toward the river with the horse. The Emperor of the South seeks to speak with the wizard Derk, one of the warriors called out as soon as Blade was near enough. First thing first, Blade thought. Barnabas's horse was half dead with thirst. Blade took it to the river and saw it start drinking before he turned and said quite politely, I'm afraid my father won't get here until this evening. Excuse me, I need to get at a nose bag. The horse is starving. And do any of you happen to have any coffee? The wizard who's supposed to be building this camp has gone and got drunk. I love how much Blade takes everything into hand here. It would be so easy for him to panic and not ask for help, and especially not ask strangers like this, who are rather imposing, to ask for help. But he gets over that and just goes for it, and it pays off. They find him a nose bag, they find coffee, like the whole thing. And that to me is it reminds me of Men in Black when they're all supposed to be filling out that paperwork and nobody goes and gets the table except for Will Smith's character. He like goes and drags it all the way across the room so that he can write on it. And it's the sort of thing where you have to be willing to go and take the help that you have and not be embarrassed about it. And that's a really key part of being a leader, I think. So I really liked the way that he handled this whole thing, and I thought it was extremely mature of him and really practical. So they sit down, and, everybody, by the way, as this continues and more people show up, every single solitary person who shows up tells Blade that the camp is in the wrong place until he is, like, ready to lose his mind. So this guy is telling him, I don't want your father to hit my legions too hard. They're all new men. Most of the veterans got killed in last year's tours. I'm Titus, Emperor, I'm Blade, said Blade, and was surprised to find himself shaking hands warmly with the Emperor of the South. I liked the way you saw to the horse first, Titus told him. Barnabas must have had it tied up to that hut for days, Blade said angrily. I very nearly kicked him. I even sort of did, but he was so drunk he didn't feel it. So they have a pretty, like, amiable conversation. And Titus tells him about all of the stuff that he has been doing that has also been going wrong. And how they got stuck in, like, a marsh for a while. And he talks about how the marsh folk just laughed at them. I thought they were supposed to be on our side, but... Oh, you have company. So then here comes another group of people. There's a tall, gloomy one that is King Luther. And he is excited, actually, to see Titus there. They're kind of buddies. So for a time, things are actually kind of lively. We've got people who are friendly with each other, just having a meal and hanging out and waiting for Derk to turn up. And then we have... the fucking priests show up. And these guys are such a bummer. They just really put a damper on everything. It's such a shame because everybody was having a good time. They're like gilded picnic baskets with really amazing food in there. And, you know, the king is like, I think he offers some people to like build a latrine. Like Blade is like, do you have anybody? And he's like, oh yeah, you can take some guys. They've been doing shit like that all week. So they're really good at it by now. Here it is. Okay. He goes and sees how Barnabas is getting along. And Barnabas again is like not aware that the cold is from Blade. And so Blade brings him that coffee and he's like, oh, thank God, maybe this will help warm me up. And I'm like, oh, poor sweet summer child. No, it will not. Okay. There's some toffee-nosed bard gone and parked himself in there. Toffee-nosed. What does that even mean? I am super like, that's a weird turn of phrase. Okay, so here it is. Can you spare a few legionaries to dig us some latrines? Oh, it's not the king, it's the emperor. Titus grinned. I don't see why not. They've been doing it every day for a fortnight now. They should be rather good at it, and they're only sitting about at the moment. King Luther laughed so much at Blade's idea that he nearly choked. Meanwhile, Barnabas must have started to work on the cookhouse. So yeah, I really enjoy this little party. And then the high priests arrive. Umru, of course, is not so bad. He's pretty adorable in his weird way. But there are a couple of others that are just really uptight and what's the word I want? Uptight, self-important. Like they really take themselves super seriously. And then Umru starts quizzing him about like the way that the camp is set up. So Umru says, I owe your father that courtesy that I will wait, to thank him for putting this camp so far away on this side of the mountains. This suggests that the battles will be here too. Is this so? So that's why he asked for Barnabas to put it over here, was to help out Umru and keep all of the, I think, you know, maybe there was a whole other thing and it just looks that way, but that's what it seems as if is being suggested here. I fear these other priests with me are coming to complain. Maybe you should warn your father. Blade looked up at them in their colored robes, staring grimly down from their horses. From the other temples of the other gods, Umru told him, they do not like this idea that a god must manifest to the pilgrim parties. That was Mr. Chesney's idea, Blade protested. It's nothing to do with my father. Their reverences, as I told you. Will you take the boy's word and return home? We shall stay and talk to the wizard, a dour priest in a red robe replied. Do you know that I always thought dour was pronounced dour because I associated the type of face that you would make as being the type of face that you would make if you had eaten something sour, and you get that sort of like grimace. And so I decided it was sour, and I just found out only like months ago that it's pronounced dour because of an audiobook. And even in the audiobook, I was like, what word are they saying? And I had to like look it up. But yeah, so these guys are all here to complain and have a problem with some different things. And eventually 16 of them in total show up. And Barnabas has to go and get a bunch of, benches for them to sit on while they wait. And they're all, super snotty and ungrateful at the fact that there is, just this simple bench. They just aren't impressed with it. And they sit there looking so unhappy and, grim that everybody else who'd been having a good time and were sort of getting along sort of goes silent because all of the fun has been sucked out of the whole area. And yeah, the chief werewolf arrives, a gaunt man dressed all over in leather who looked nearly as grim as the priests. "Chief werewolf," he said abruptly, "this camp is in the wrong—" "I know," said Blade, "and I'm afraid my father won't get here until this evening." "Then I'll wait," said the werewolf. "This camp has got to be moved, or the werewolves won't be able to manage. We have to attack pilgrim parties 60 miles away between battles." "And I have to hold Evil Court for them 80 miles away," King Luther called out. "It can't be done. Come and join us, my friend." The werewolf glowered at Blade as he stepped over toward the hampers. Blade was rather glad that the next people to arrive were only a squad of legionaries, each carrying a spade and all running briskly in step, while a fierce officer ran behind them. Now, question, because it's hard to tell in this universe, is that a real werewolf, or is that somebody playing the part of a werewolf for the sake of the pilgrim party? Because I couldn't tell. Because later on, some vampires show up, but it turns out that they're not real vampires. They've been glamored to, look that way. Or else they're real vampires who have just been glamored to look much more threatening than they normally look. But I got the impression that they aren't really vampires. So, let's see. Blade was wondering if there was anything about it in his black book, which he hoped Kit still had safely. He's thinking about whether or not Titus could lend them some people to help command their troops and get them in line. When he looked up to see the next arrival, just dismounting from the most splendid horse he had ever set eyes on. Even the bard deigned to give a slight whistle and remark as Blade went past him, "Now that is horse flesh." This latest person, as Blade saw when he was near enough, was female. She was tall enough to be an elf, but probably Blade thought she was something else. Her hair was brownish and her eyes slanted a bit. Her skin was brown as well, and though she was dressed from head to foot in soft white doeskin, the doeskin was the only soft thing about her. She was as tough and stringy and fierce as dried curried meat. He watched her put her hand on her narrow hips and look ferociously over the crowd around the hampers. "Which of you is Wizard Derk?" she snapped. Blade prudently hung back, out of trouble. So this woman is Wendella Horselady, and she is really irritated at the way the horses are getting treated in these pilgrim parties, and the battles. Everybody just fucking kills horses without even caring, because it's going to give them a leg up on the battle if the mounted people no longer are mounted. And it's resulted in her not even being able to keep up the breeding enough to replace the ones that are killed by the next year. And she's, not only angry about the fact that the herd has been so diminished, but at the just cruelty of it. She's she's a champion for the horses. She is their representative. And I really enjoyed her, even though she's a little infuriating because she just doesn't let up for a second. She is very single-minded. But I loved the way that she handles this. Just goes off in this monologue. She gets interrupted at one point by Umru, and she just doesn't even acknowledge that he said anything. It's very entertaining. I just enjoy her. And this isn't our concern, Titus said. Our legions mostly fight on foot. Yes, I know they do, the horse lady retorted. Your lot is the worst of all. Your beastly legions go for the horses every time in order to get the riders off. Well, I'm warning you, if they do that this year, if a single horse gets maimed or killed... Look, said King Luther, you can't have a battle without any horses being hurt. Yes, you can, if you fight on foot, the lady contradicted him, and you're going to do that, because as I said, if one single horse gets hurt, I shall simply recall the entire lot. That's surely easier to say than to do, King Luther said. For a start, you'd have to. I'd just do this. The horse lady put her fingers to her mouth and gave a long, warbling whistle. The heads of all the horses turned toward her. Then they all, even Barnabas's horse, and Umru's, and those that had been tied to the stakes by King Luther's men, trotted eagerly toward her over the shale. The bard's horse came out of the dome at a canter and reached her first. The noise for a moment of hooves crashing on stones was horrible. You see, the horse lady said, out of the crowd of horses, nothing simpler. She patted necks and rubbed noses. There, my loves, go back to your borrowers for now. I'll call you again when I need you. All the horses obediently turned and went back to where they had come from, except for the bard's horse, which the bard caught on its way up the hill and made to stand beside him. So, this is pretty fun. I just enjoy all of the different pieces of logistics that everybody has an issue with. There isn't a single simple thing about the organization of this entire enterprise. Even a fucking camel shows up at one point, which I was just like, what? He gathered this man was the personal servant of a vizier, and his message was something about the emir acting strange. He told him to go over to the hampers and wait. At least the horse lady, who was now walking about haranguing everybody whom she happened to be near, could not possibly worry about a camel, or so he hoped. So the emir is acting strange. We're gonna visit him in a second, but I have no idea what's going on here. So Blade, basically, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit here, handles all of these people that turn up, and Colette arrives at one point and asks him to get some people to judge her and tell her if she's beautiful, and they both do. And it's sort of weird the way that this is going, because she really wants that validation. So when they tell her that she's beautiful, she just kind of, what's the word I want? Later on, when it's time for her to get her appearance changed for the wild hunt, she doesn't want to be changed and says, no, I want to stay beautiful. Which I was like, what's happening here, Colette? I feel like she's gotten suddenly a little bit obsessive about her looks. Like that one encounter with Querida sort of made her, I don't know, just so much more conscious of it. But yeah. And I like the fact that when they tell Colette that she's so beautiful and they're obviously being really sincere, he is astonished and is like, well, she's beautiful, huh? Who knew? Because he can't even become objective enough in that moment, since he knows her so well, to see her through their eyes. He just kind of has to take the word of these two people that he picked out because they were honest people and believe them when they say that. So finally, all of these soldiers start to show up, and Derk shows up again riding scales, and the whole thing is very impressive. But the sensation lasted only moments. After that, almost everyone surged towards Derk, shouting to be heard. Barnabas went past Blade at a rolling run, crying out, I can explain everything. The bard, too, mounted his horse and rode that way with the rest. But instead of joining the crowd around Scales, he turned aside and rode up to Shona. As Shona dismounted from Nancy Cobber, he handed her a scroll with a large seal dangling from it, and then rode away without a word to anyone. Shona put Nancy's reins under her arm and unrolled the scroll, looking mystified. She looked at what was inside. She went pale. Then she dropped Nancy's reins and threw herself on the shaly ground, screaming and crying. So it turns out that she has been expelled from the Bardic College. She has broken our express command not to assist in any way with the pilgrim parties or pilgrims. Had the ex-student condescended to attend at our college, she would have learned that all bards are now forbidden to have any dealings with these tours. She is accordingly hereby expelled from our college and forbidden to perform as a bard in any manner henceforth. Which is so crazy to me. First of all, she says that she didn't know. Nobody said. And I can't help but feel like this is not a real rule. And that she wasn't actually expelled. That this is all a setup for some reason. But Shona isn't a big player in this whole game. So I'm not entirely sure why this would be part of the plan to sabotage everything. The only thing that I can think is that Kirita is trying to do so much to distract Derk. I mean, I never would have thought that what's going on between Derk and his wife is meant to, like, make him do not a great job at being Dark Lord, but that appears to be the case. So maybe this is part of that as well. But the way that this is written, had the ex-student condescended to attend at our college, she would have learned that all bards, and like the way that's said is almost like if she had bothered to show up to class. But I'm not sure that's really what they're saying there. It's just what I got from it. Which like seems to imply that she was not very dedicated to her studies. And I don't know that that's true. And I feel like if it were true, somebody else would mention like, well, you should have gone to class. But I might be misinterpreting the way that that is worded. But Shona basically like goes into such grief at losing her place at this school that she shuts down completely for like 2 straight days and finally begins to eat and talk again. But it's after a period of pretty serious, like, what's the word I want to be using here? Because she's not catatonic. That's not exactly fair. But it's pretty close to that, where she's just staring and not eating and not responding to anything anybody says and not acknowledging like anyone around her. But yeah, I'm just really like, Patricia says, well, it's not just school. They banned her whole career path. Right. But I'm focusing on the school part because I'm trying to understand what it is that they were saying with that sentence. And her whole career path, like they're like, well, you aren't allowed to be a bard, which I feel like because of how extreme that is, that's part of why it doesn't feel real to me. You know, I feel like it's such an over the top response that I'm just like, that can't be right. And I, you know, I'm tempted to feel that way a lot of the time when things seem way over the top. But that does not mean that they are not so. It just means that it's hard for my brain to comprehend something that ridiculous. So we'll see. But yeah, she's like really losing it. And they all have to sort of keep an eye on her and comfort her because she's really not okay. Meanwhile, Horse Lady is still trying to like yell at Derk. And he finally yells at her, I said yes. And she just stops and stares at him and he says, you don't listen, you know. I said yes when you began. We'll fight on foot. I've been worried about the way the pilgrims treat horses for years. That's why I'm breeding one with wings. I thought they'd survive better. Oh, said the Horse Lady, almost faintly. Thank you. She went hurriedly away to the riverbank where Pretty was making the bad mistake of trying to flirt with the camel. Oh, God bless. So I like that moment of her just being like, not letting someone get a word in edgewise to the point where she doesn't notice that they are now on her side, which I think is amazing. But Derk says that he will speak to the Bardic president as soon as he can because this is ridiculous. It'll be all right. I won't let this happen. Lords, I'm tired. Is someone seeing to the wild hunt tonight? So Kit is going to take care of that. And he channels a lot of his anger into it because like Kit, when they get the notice from that bard and he like, you know, sails off at his horse, Kit's ready to follow that guy and like rip him apart because he's so angry. And everyone else is like, that's not going to do any, that doesn't change the message, buddy. You know, like that's not going to do anything. So, okay. They finally decide that they're going to go eat. Shona will not eat anything. And there is a lot of going in and out of all of the different areas and checking up on Barnabas's work and Derk sort of reprimanding him and being like, dude, why did you fucking like things are luckily mostly set up, but you really left it too late. And he says, I think you could have made an effort. And what he means by this is like to not drink. And Barnabas says, I did, Derk. I do. I've tried healers and I've tried spells, and none of it stops me breaking out and binging. But I did take care to set all the battle spells in the dome before I touched a drop this time. Those are important. You ought to let me activate them. You know I hate spells that force people against their will. Yes, but you'll never get them to behave like real soldiers without. Look in that dome. They're just lying about or beating one another up. I know, Derk said sadly. I'd hope to appeal to their reason, but I'm not sure they have any. All right, activate those spells then. And why are you shivering? Withdrawal, said Barnabas. Derk looked at him closely and said, Blade! They were standing right beside Shona while Blade took the cold spell off, but Shona did not seem to see or hear them. So, yeah, Shona, girl, I'm sorry. You need to have a hot cup of tea and calm down. And there's an interesting moment here where Blade is like kind of being a little bit insensitive about what's going on with Shona. And Kit tries to get him to understand by saying, you know how you felt when Dad said you couldn't go to the university. Yes, but I feel better now after the Oracle, Blade said. Kit glared. Thickhead. Nobody took me to any Oracle, did they? I feel for her. I know what it's like not to have any future. Blade decided to go quietly missing after that. Kit had made him feel guilty, and he was not sure that was fair. Unfortunately, Colette had noticed him slipping away among the friendly cows, and Derk easily caught up with him. And I like that, like the moment of like, I feel guilty and I'm not sure that's fair. It's a real sort of like privileged situation where you suddenly realize that you have some and you feel bad about it, but you also feel mad for feeling bad because it's hard not to get defensive the first time that you notice that you have an advantage you never really like understood or thought about. And the fact that you kind of were categorizing yourself as being as oppressed as a certain group of people, and then you find out that you're really not, that you have an edge on everyone that's not necessarily something that you earned, can really make you feel like weird about the world. So I liked the way that this is described as like feeling guilty and then feeling like me feeling guilty isn't even fair. No, it's not. But you having the privilege that you have isn't fair either. So guess what? Nothing's fair and everybody feels terrible all the time. Welcome to life. So they go and see Kerida to talk about getting one of the gods to appear. And Kerida sees how terrible Derk looks and how exhausted Blade looks and feels kind of guilty about what she's trying to do. But she knows that it's like for a good cause, so she has to push herself to keep it up, even though these two present a pretty woeful sight. And she presents him with some stuff that she's been notified with these messages. Meanwhile, as you're here, I'd like to ask you about a couple of these messages. This is from a farmer in the Central Plains complaining that his flocks are being attacked by small carnivorous sheep. Any comments? No idea how that happened, Derk said with perfect honesty. Blade uncomfortably studied the flagstones on the floor. And this, Kerida said, waving the second paper, states that a party of men in black armor attacked a monastery near Blendish but were beaten off by magic. Fortunately, the abbot is an ex-pupil of mine. Have you been losing people, Derk? No, I have, said Blade. They try to escape all the time. Scales is going to go try and round them all up, Derk said. Is that all? We've got to get down to the Emirates today, too. Well, Kerida's hand hovered over the message slips again. This was something quite different and rather worrying, which had only come on this morning. She was in two minds whether to keep it secret or not. But probably, because of that slight guilt she felt, she thought she would mention it to Derk anyway. Do you know a wizard called Betula? Derk nodded. Blade said, she's a friend of Mum's. Then you'll know that she is reliable, said Karita, and probably that her field of study is the nature of magic itself. She says she's finding a steady decrease in the ambient magic over quite a large area north of Costa Maret. What do you make of that? Derk looked perplexed. I don't see how she can. I always thought magic was part of the very earth itself. So did I, but it appears to be leaving us, Karita said. If Petula is right, this is going to panic everyone, including Mr. Chesney, so I must ask you not to mention it. But just keep your magic senses peeled as you go about, will you? You might discover what's going on. Now, if you'll forgive me. So they go to the Emirates, and I'm running out of time here, so I'll have to hit this hard and quick. Lol. They go to the Emirates, and Blade has a lovely time, because he winds up getting handed over to basically a harem who they're full. It's like all of these beautiful women in gauzy, transparent clothing, treating him like a god and combing his hair and repairing his clothing and massaging his shoulders and feeding him and bathing him and the whole thing. So he is having a delightful time. But the Grand Vizier is talking about the Emir. You must see for yourself. Here, stand here. Watch that cross corridor. Here he comes now. A tall, thin man in a red hat crossed the end of the corridor where they were standing. He was walking very upright in a sort of stiff strut, holding both his arms bent rigidly at the elbows. I am a puppet, he was saying in a blank, toneless voice. I have no mind. There, said the Grand Vizier, as the Emir stalked out of sight. Did drugs do this? A spell? Is it the red hat? The tourists all stare at him strangely. We try to keep them away from him. It will not do. I'm afraid, Derk said, panting from trotting in the heat, that he's pretending to be hypnotized. It's my fault. I didn't know he couldn't act. I'll try to sort him out, but it's going to take a bit of time and tact. So he has to go and take care of that. And after Blade gets treated like this king, all of a sudden, one of the women says, tell the Emir that there are going to be no more slave girls from now on, here or anywhere else. Blade began, thinking he ought to explain that the Emir was not behaving as if he would listen. But they were all gone. They had not left by any of the doors. The room was simply empty, apart from somebody's silk scarf slowly fluttering to the tiled floor in a warm blast of scented air. It felt like a mass translocation to Blade. He was still wondering where they could have gone when the scarf reached the floor and became a folded piece of paper lying on the tiles. Blade patted over and picked it up. It was, to his astonishment, a note from his mother. Dear Blade, please give the Emir the message about slave girls. It's important. I'm thinking of you a lot and looking forward to your visit here with your pilgrim party. And tell Derk that I've remembered about the dragon. All my love, Mara. So the Emir flips out that there are no slave girls. I don't know what to make of this at all. No idea. Especially because his mother is involved. Like, is this just sabotage? This feels like there's more happening than just that. But yeah, I don't know. So then they wind up heading out to this castle, Chell. And it's this beautiful castle that they're going to have to kind of like destroy for the sake of the pilgrim party. And also they're going to lose a bunch of the grape harvest, which you would think they would be really like bummed out about. But everybody seems to be taking it very much in stride. Derk and Blade showed up to the castle where they were met by the Duchess of Chell, who seemed quite resigned to losing her city and her grape harvest. It's the way it goes these days, wizard, she said. I'm sorry the Duke's not here to meet you himself. He'd tell you the same. Can I offer you any refreshment? Derk refused on the grounds that they were both full of the Emir's sticky cakes, and they went away again through the city and downhill among the vines. There is something wrong, Derk said, but I'm blowed if I can see what. Could you? I thought, Blade said doubtfully, that they all seemed a bit too cheerful. Me too, Derk agreed. No regrets even about these grapes. But it's nothing you can pin down. Let's see if Prince Talathan's noticed anything. I'm realizing, guys, that I'm going to have a whole other chapter to talk about, and I'm over time. I am really going to have to rush this. My apologies, Patricia. Because I have another recording after this, or else I would be able to go over a little bit more comfortably. But Talathan, the elf who pledged himself to help out Derk, agrees to try and like help sort out the grapes and like save them so that they aren't completely destroyed and find out what's going on in this town. And he winds up coming back to talk to Derk later and tells him that there are no people left. There are just pilgrim parties. And the actual city is empty, and the pilgrim parties are really, like, the people running them are having trouble not allowing them to see each other, because they're supposed to feel like everything that happens is happening for them alone and not because of its being part of this huge tour with multiple parties going through. So they, like, the whole place is empty, and then another city also disappears. So I really don't know what that's about. Like, what a crazy, thousands of people just vanishing, you know? Are they going on strike? Because that's amazing. That would be awesome if that was what it was. The what happens in 17 really boils down to the battle. So thankfully it won't take too long to talk about. But the battle is no joke. These are not people playing for fun. These are actual human beings dying. And it's a really interesting, like, description of how Blade feels simultaneously so, like, excited and pumped by the battle, but also so horrified by it that he feels that the two different reactions are tearing him apart into two completely different people. And he just wasn't ready to feel this way about it. He was excited about the battle. And I expected that once he started to see the fallout from it, that he'd reconsider. But instead of it being like, oh, I am actually horrified. This is so much more like disgusting and less full of honor and glory than I expected, which is what I thought. He has that as well as the other feeling of still being pumped. That seems like a real fair, like, reaction, actually. And something that I think probably a lot of people can understand, like being sort of abhorring violence, but also like enjoying it under the right circumstances. And the whole way that this goes, like, it turns out that Dawn feels the same way and says something later about it. And the fact that he, like, is having a hard time handling it. And he winds up confessing, Dawn does, to Derk that it was really hard for him. And Derk winds up giving him a different job to do. But I really love the fact that despite Derk supposedly being the Dark Lord, he lets Kit pretend to be the Dark Lord himself and, like, create an illusion of someone riding on his back and make himself like 3 times his normal size to be really imposing, and that it works really well. So I think that was kind of cool. But I'm trying to see, because that is really the main thing, is that, like, the battle and then all of the fanatics and the whole thing, and the way that Blade is just, like, caught completely off guard by the fact that his friggin', what do you call it, is going to be starting soon. His tour that he's leading. He winds up being told that, like, it's the day after tomorrow. Yeah, you've got 3 days to get yourself down to the coast. Your pilgrim party starts the day after that. Here's your wizardly robes and the list of your pilgrims in this folder. Got your black book, map, and pamphlets? You'll need those. And do remember, there's bound to be someone who'll report back to Mr. Chesney. Pilgrims pay a reduced fee if they do, so there's always someone. Make sure you always do exactly what's in the black book, won't you? It was a tremendous shock to Blade. He was thinking of his own tour as still in the distant future, and here it was on top of him. It was almost equally a great relief. He did not need to stand another battle after all. Otherwise, he felt rather frantic. Yeah, that seems fair. So I'm trying to find... Oh, yeah, and Shona tells him that she's going to come with him and she's going to be his bard. And he's like, but won't the bard at college be super mad at you? And she's like, yeah, whatever, fuck them. I'm not going to just not do anything. I'm going to do what I want, and they can just come after me and yell at me or do whatever they're going to do. Let's see what happens. I was like, yeah, that seems like a good way to approach it as well. Okay, so yeah, that's the end of chapter 17. So I was able to talk about most of that. But I thought that description of his reaction to the battle was really intriguing and surprising. All right. Well, thank you so much, Patricia, for coming and for commissioning this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm sorry I went over time and that I had to rush a bit at the end, but I still think that I covered everything. And excuse me, good Lord. And hopefully I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.